All right, we're on YouTube then.
Right.
Uh,
Hey, I wanted to congratulate you. I heard I saw your Facebook notes. You guys are getting married on August 5th. That's awesome.
Yeah, that will actually be 6 years that we met, and probably in one of the most crazy places. We actually met on a Facebook chat group, and it wasn't even like that. It was just singles and mingles, people to hang out with, and we just clicked. And yeah, it's been 6 years, and we're still going. Oh,
Yeah, I was wondering how you guys met, because a lot of times for a lot of us, the relationships completely fall apart after the program crap comes out in full force. And then a lot of people will find somebody in the community. That's why I was curious about you two. If you found each other that way, or but you found each other through a different way. Was that before you knew all this shit was going on with you?
oh yeah, like this was way before that. I'm still just getting set up, but we can chat about this while I'm doing that. Um, it's actually kind of an interesting story. Like I said, we met on a Facebook chat group, and we ended up meeting up, and she told me she had a young fella, and I was like, that's fine. And I had just so happened to work at the dairy. I was like, well, bring him over and we'll have ice cream, and we can get to know each other. And that's kind of where it jumped off. I bought the young fella ice cream, and we came about this relationship in the most original way we could possibly think. And what we did was we just told everybody how fucked up we were, like told each other for like 2 hours straight how fucked up we were and everything that was wrong in our lives. And that we just shot our shot. It's like, look, I got this crazy ex. I had this chick that I ended up getting arrested with. Like, and she's like, oh, well, I got this fucked up in my life. And my dad runs my world right now because he's got dementia. And I got a kid whose father's an asshole and he takes me to court all the time. And I'm just like, I'm in.
Well,
And literally,
that's a
she
special conversation, man, because people don't say that. If you can have that conversation with somebody, it's going to work if you make it work. Because most people, the problem is they don't want to talk about any of that, and they don't want to deal with it.
Oh, absolutely.
You're
Sorry.
lucky. Doesn't matter how many problems there are. I just wanted to tell you that because it's rare to hear somebody say that.
Yeah. Just let me pop out of my phone here. I'm having a bit of issue with the tablet. I'm going to send you the link. Facebook. Of course, I'm in the show, not my profile.
That's like the NASA view. You're sideways and you're straight. Looks like you're floating. Space shuttle, ISS feed.
There it's on Facebook and post. Oh yeah, you're sideways. Yep. Let me back in there. Okay, I'm back. We're back. Nathan's back. Sorry, this is so friggin' hillbilly still. But
yeah, we went live yet?
Yeah, we are. That's why I was just kind of rambling there for a few minutes. Okay. As Nathan just said, we are live. So I'm going to give everybody a quick intro here. Welcome to the After Dark show. I'm Don Rogers, and I'm really happy to have a guest on tonight that I've seen on Rob Kellell's channel several times, The Typical Skeptic, and on a few different podcasts. And he has some really interesting memories and recall and information to bring forward. And I'm just going to read a quick thing that he had for me here. Nathan Ciszek is the United States military MyLab is the United States military MyLab, a disclosure activist, targeted individual, and host of the Haging Contactee channel.
I'll say it for you, Hajayan Contactee.
Thank you. because I would have tripped over that about 10 times.
It's got to say
Um,
Haji a lot. You know, if you say Haji, I think it's slang for people in India or something. I don't know. It works. It uses practice.
uh, Nathan's MyLab experiences began as a young child, um, which eventually resulted in his physical abduction at age 6. From there, he found himself being led through a series of paranormal experiences staged by a group of elusive spiritual beings that later masqueraded themselves as extraterrestrials that were using a virtual satanic cult as a means of establishing contact. This led to nearly 2 decades of abusive contact, followed by a discovery that the ETs were actually humans working for the United States military in a program they call IBIS. And tonight, Nathan is going to take us into basically an autobiographical explanation of what my labs are and some of his experiences. So I'm really just going to let her rip as soon as I'm done introducing him here. And yeah, I'll have some questions on the way, but me being a newly awakened individual, I need to hear all of this. So I am just thrilled to have you here. And Nathan, take it away.
Well, thanks, Don. Thanks for having me on the After Dark show. I really, really appreciate it. And so let's see, where should we get started here? We were talking a little bit by text, and you wanted me to give a good explanation of what a MyLab is, correct? Can we start there? Okay.
Yeah,
All
just
right. So
right off the start. Like if somebody just stumbled into this community today, what is a my lab?
okay. Well, people have pretty much everybody has heard about alien abductees, and the truth of it is that there really isn't any such thing as just an alien abductee. They're all military abductions to some degree or another. There's military involvement in it. Depends on what country you live in, what treaty they have with the extraterrestrials that are abducting you, and also running the programs. So technically, an abductee is a MyLab to some extent or another, depending on, and it really, the confusion comes in is when the person begins to recount their memories and they begin to re-experiencing them. And, you know, a lot of times there's no obvious military involvement in there, but the military is overseeing things. So a MyLab essentially is the technical term for an ET abduction victim. But it goes a little bit deeper than that because there's different types of abductions. You have the reproductive ones, and so on and so forth. But this is a bit different because this falls into the SSP and mind control and a variety of programs. And what's different about me versus a lot of the other people that you hear is that I don't have the extensive memories of my experiences in the programs because for a lot of us, we never really get to that point. What happens is we hit a brick wall, and that brick wall essentially is a new age or an occult spiritual deception, which is what they put me into. So I guess we'll go from where this really starts at. I'm going to go back to my childhood, and I'm going to recount my earliest memory that is one that didn't happen physically in this container body. So this actually happened in what I thought was a heavenly realm because it was a setting that was surrounded by a white haze. The interesting thing, and this is where the MyLab stuff starts to come in, the evidence of it, is that the beings in this memory had black or shading over their faces. Sometimes they had an opaque rectangle or a square. So they would have a rectangle over their eyes, a square over their mouth. So it was overt memory editing is what I was experiencing. Plus, there was a white haze. So, as a kid, when you remember this, you know, when you try to tell the adults, they don't really grasp it. They don't know what you're talking about. They think it's their, you know, it's imagination of a child. So you really keep it to yourself. But I always pondered what it was, and I thought it was heaven because that's what, you know, the social programming tells you that it's likely heaven. The interesting thing is that none of it represented what you would expect in a heavenly realm. So we'll go through it real quick. I remember standing in a room that was in a white haze. What was interesting is later in my life, my late teens or early 20s, especially around between 15, 16, forward, I started having these flashbacks, and they were in consecutive order. They're in exact chronological order of the events that happened in the memory. So everything that I had forgotten since I was a child was filled back in, but I was able to see the surroundings in a room without so much of the fog. The faces were still shaded and so forth. So I knew it was a medical setting. And that was the kind of the conundrum. It's like, wait a minute, it's supposed to be heaven. It's got a white haze. It looks like, like you expect heaven to look, maybe sort of, but now it's looking like a medical scene. It's a medical room of some kind. So here's what basically happened. I'm standing in a room with three other beings. There's a computer terminal at the far end of the wall. Like it's kind of a rectangular room. So the left hand up against the wall on the left-hand side, there's a computer terminal built into the wall. There's a table or like a shelf desk that's right next to it. And above it, there's a series of cabinets. And I couldn't see any of this clear until years later when I had a hypnosis session. That's when everything was in full 20/20 vision. So the cabinets were like the old style from the 60s and 70s. They were that pressed wood, but they had kind of like a almost like a vinyl sticker wood grain kind of coating, like a wrap on them. And I don't know if you remember that stuff, Don, but it was like the ugliest cabinets you can imagine. It was just generic, kind of like IKEA on steroids. If you have IKEA up here,
Yeah,
just real cheap.
it was almost covered in like a shelf liner. It wasn't even that high a quality. I know the
Yeah. So it had all of that. And then on the right hand side, there was a table with some kind of device, and there was little LED indicators, or what I thought was LEDs, because we don't know exactly what technology they're using. But this was between the 60s and 70s. So they had high-tech stuff, and it really wasn't in a heavenly realm. It was at White Sands, New Mexico, underground facilities where this was. So I thought it was someplace else, and that was the whole point. So for most of my life, this was the memory of the afterlife. I wasn't supposed to remember this. I've talked about it with people, and the general consensus was, wow, you remembered something that you weren't supposed to. But in reality, I was supposed to remember this. This was a type of engineered awakening that they were doing. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but so I'm in this room. There's three beings there. There's a large machine to my left. It looks in some ways like an MRI machine, but it's built differently. It's got the main portion of it looks like the top of an old stagecoach. It has kind of a curved top to it. It's made out of what looks like plastic. It's like an off-white color protruding out, and I would say it's probably 9 to 10 feet tall. And then protruding out of the front of it is a platform that you lay on, and then it has like a dome that comes down over top that's hinged. It's made out of some kind of clear, some sort of material. And so I'm in this room, and I'm worried because I'm afraid that they're going to put me into a lifetime where I'm going to be handicapped. And I'm thinking about other people who went, and I was thinking about specifically about this one particular person who was really, really close to. And I didn't know the context of the relationship, but it felt like a very close, very, very close friendship. And so I'm looking at this person, I'm remembering how they were, and I always looked at them and thought they were Asian, but turns out they're what you call Hajian, which is 7 to 8 foot ET. It looks like maybe Polynesian or Indian descent. Very refined features, light brown skin, slits for eyes like a cat. 5 fingers, just longer legs, shorter upper body, arms. I don't remember if they're any pretty much the same, I think. And very, very human looking, just much, much bigger. And but at the time, I didn't know. I thought that this person was human. I thought all of this was taking place on Earth. I had no idea there was military involved in this. So it was always a mystery. And then my life was full of paranormal events, and it built on this one particular memory. So I knew that I was different in some way, but I really didn't know what it meant. So getting back to the memory, what was weird about it is that they were preparing me to send me into this container body. And so they were going over some things with me, and it was all being done telepathically. So that's what really got me when I was like a kid trying to make sense of this, because here, I'm thinking it's heaven. And of course, I'm speaking telepathically, and I'd seen a lot of near-death experience videos for over the course of my childhood. And as I grew up, I was highly interested in it. So I was piecing it all together using the information that I had. So obviously I thought this was a non-physical place. It was a spiritual realm, but it really wasn't. And they did a good job of obfuscating all of the evidence that I would have, because if I would have seen the type of technology that I saw in my hypnosis session, I would have made the mistake of thinking this was something other than what it was. So one of the lab personnel, which were actually referred to as life engineers later. I don't know if that's an accurate term for what they really were, but it is pretty much what they were doing. They were putting me in an engineered lifetime experience, and every my lab technically is in an engineered lifetime, because when they put you in society as the original self, they're engineering your entire life experience. They're suppressing your ability, to live your life and be free. They want to control you. They'll make you sick if necessary, or they'll give you some life mission and preoccupy you with that. But they always have something to keep you under control with, because it's an engineered experience. So they were preparing me for this. And I wasn't happy because I knew that something wasn't right. And I didn't know the context of it. But what I did know is that they had promised me that I was going to be some kind of a teacher, but this had been taken away from me for reasons that I wasn't aware of. And, when you're telepathic, and you would think that you could remember and actually get this information, but as a my lab in a base, you're actually as a controlled asset, I guess you could say, as a military asset, whether it be super soldier, whatever you are, you're in a base, they've completely mind controlled you. So they can, even though you're telepathic, they can keep anything they want away from you. You're not even aware that you have alters or other versions of yourself if they don't want that to be available to you. So you're under a controlled state of consciousness. So I'm promised to be a teacher at the time, and I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that I was going to have difficulty with what they were going to put me through because I was going to be handicapped. And at this point, I could see this individual that I remembered. And he was pretty young looking in this memory, but this is the memory of whoever he was as a Hajayan, and I wasn't sure who he was. I just knew that this was a friend, and I thought maybe this was somebody that they had sent to Earth before me, which is what they had done. But technically, they hadn't sent him anywhere. They actually sent him from the base into a container body to live another lifetime. So the lifetime that I was thinking, I was actually remote viewing him in his present lifetime where he was. And I knew that I was in for something like this, so I was protesting as much as I was allowed to. So I saw him in a wheelchair being pushed by his mother, and it looked like maybe Chicago, or it had a big city feel because there was big buildings on both sides of the street. And he was on the right side of the sidewalk in a wheelchair. He looked a lot like Stephen Hawking. I mean, he was pretty badly crippled up, pretty severely handicapped. And his mother was pushing him, and there was a couple of kids around her. It was an African American family, and I just remember, thinking to myself, that isn't going to work. I don't want to be handicapped, and I was really worried about them taking my eyesight from me, which is the thing that I was afraid of the most. And I kept protesting that, and I kept saying it just isn't going to work for me. At one point, the guy that was over at the computer asked me what race I wanted to be. He gave me two choices. At that point, it was white and black. What was interesting about this memory is that I was speaking in English. I was aware of the racial tension in society because I made a joke and I said, I prefer to be white because, and I said something kind of like, I like white skin anyway, but it was more like a fashion statement. I was kind of making a joke, but nobody really laughed. There wasn't any humor at all. It was a very serious situation. And I'd been protesting, like I said before. So at one point, I was thinking about my friend and where he was, and I could see him where he was at that moment. And I just said to myself, that's just not going to work. And that's when this woman who was also in the lab came walking up to me and looked at me directly in the face. But in the memory, her face was blacked out. And she said she spoke to me telepathically, and she said, you have to take a handicapped. And she said it very sternly in a very authoritarian way. And I just remember looking at the floor, in like a defeated way, knowing that I was in for a really rough ride. And I said to myself, I guess I'll figure it out. Well, first I said, I wonder how I'm going to make a living not being able to speak and whatever else they're going to do to me. So, I had to concede that this was it. And I just said, I guess I'll figure it out when I get there. Next thing I know, they're putting me into the machine. I'm told to get inside it. The lid closes down over top of me, and then it fills up full of white light. And the three of them were standing on my left side, and they were talking to me telepathically before this whole process finished. Um, at the peak or at the end of the process, the entire chamber fills up full of a bright white light. I don't remember feeling anything. There may have been feelings, but this was all edited out of the memory. It could have been a painful experience. It could have been non-painful. I have no idea. But I go into a body at the 12th week of conception. And I've looked this up when I was doing anatomy and physiology in college. First day of class for anatomy and physiology, I looked at my textbook, and that was back when they had textbooks. I think they don't have them anymore. But when I looked in there, I could tell that it was exactly the 12th week of conception, which interestingly enough, that's when the brain activity begins in the body. So later on, what I was told was, and this is through the false ET contact that was actually military MyLab contact through V2K and other technologies, was that when they put you into a body, they have to put you in before the 12th week, around the 12th week of conception, because after that, once the brain activity begins, the soul is born in that process. So they would have to deal with another person and another inhabitant in that body. They'd have to remove it, whatever they'd have to do. But when they're putting a MyLab soul in, it's right around the 12th week. So that locks you in. And then, so what they were doing to me is putting me basically into a uterus, into a fetus inside a uterus of my mother. And I understand that this is called Project Surrogate. And it was all under a program called Project Alpha, which is the Super Soldier program. I don't have any memories of that, but the thing is, through the V2K, through the contact that I've had with the program handlers, I knew I was part of that. And also, too, when I did the hypnosis session, I looked at myself before I got in the machine, and I did have light tactical armor on. But when I got in the machine, I was wearing those little footsie things that they give you in a hospital that goes over your shoes to your socks. So I was getting pieces of information in the hypnosis session, but it was little bits and fragmented pieces. So it wasn't a very fruitful session, but it did wake me up to the fact that it wasn't another planet, because the entire ruse, the entire falsehood behind this memory that I was given later is that this was on another planet. This was a race, the Hajayan race. I was coming here for a life mission, and it was all kind of like shaped and told to me as if I had a special life mission, which is very new agey. It's a lot. Well, it's a frequent thing to be told that. So, and then, well, once I got that information, I was in kind of a transition period from the occult into the new age. So now I'll get into that in like a little bit, because that's where things really get bizarre. So I had this memory, and then as I grew older, as a child, I started having paranormal experiences from a very young age. One of the first things I noticed is that I was able to remember way back when I was really, really young. I remember when my parents actually, when my mother met my stepfather, I was a year old at a party. And I remember that. I also remember being able to think relatively high level thoughts for being a child. But then later, as I started to dissect these memories, I realized that not only was I thinking and interacting with myself and actually forming words, but what was interesting is someone was talking to me at different points, and these memories stuck, and it wasn't an accident. I remember being in a crib and being given, like, advice on what to do in the crib. I remember laying in like a carrier on the floor trying to get my mother's attention, and she was sitting on the couch. And I remember just being coached through this and thinking to myself, I can't speak. I got to yell. I got to raise hell. And then I'm being coached on, like, yeah, that's what you need to do. There was literally somebody talking to me and telling me things. For example, my stepfather, my mother had a lot of problems in their marriage. And my stepfather, I love him and everything. And it's, he isn't with us anymore. But Unfortunately, throughout his life, he dealt with a lot of narcissistic personality disorder problems, and narcissists tend to overemphasize their self-worth. They kind of overdo it with people, and they tend to come off fake sometimes. And I just remember sitting there, and I'm literally in a booth in a restaurant. I'm a year old. I'm at a birthday party for what's going to be my cousin in the future when they get married. And I've got a voice telling me he's a phony, and literally telling me this. Now, he wasn't a phony in the bigger picture. It was just that I'm dealing with somebody that's talking to me and being very harsh towards this person. So I wouldn't call him that, but this is what I was getting. And this is before the V2K was actually patented. So this could be, alien tech that they were using before they started using the stuff with, with the Gwen towers and the cell towers and so forth, the microwave transmissions, or it could have been an altar that was speaking to me. It's hard to say. I really, really don't know, but I had experiences like that. And then when I was younger, 4, 5, 6, that's when I started having the presences in the room when I was a kid at night. And I became deathly afraid of something called a seagull, which was, I was associating a seagull with a white faced gray. It looks like a gray, but it's tall and it has chalky white skin and large almond shaped eyes. These were the abductors that I had to deal with as a child. So this was the monster under my bed. This was the monsters in my closet. I referred to him as a seagull because all I really had, I never saw them. I just had a blur of a memory, like a white flash, and just kind of like I could see the black of the eyes, but that was it. And I would have dreams where I would wake up and the presence would be in the room, and I would try to run out of the room and they'd freeze me right in my place. I would just walk, I would run into a wall of energy and I couldn't move and I couldn't scream. And when I tried to, nothing would come out. And I had repetitive dreams like this. So one night, I had an experience where the whole bed shook, like in the movie The Exorcist. Because after I saw that movie, I was scared of it. I was scared, because you got to say your prayers at night, or you're going to be possessed. You have that horrible Christian prayer you got to say, where you have to give your soul to Jesus every night, because if not, the devil's going to take you from under your bed. So that really didn't help with what was happening, because I associated my prayers with what was going on in my room at night. And I would see shadows moving and things like that. And when you're a kid, you have to look at it from two ways to try to keep your sanity. Is it really my imagination, like my parents say, or is there something else to it? But it scared the hell out of me. And so anyway, rolling forward a little bit to when I was 6, this is when I had an abduction, and there may have been some non-physical visits. I know there had to have been, or could have been something prior to this, but I don't know. I was 6 years old. I was riding a bike. I just got it for Christmas. This is like the fall of 1980. So I've been riding it all year, and I still had training wheels on it. And I was only supposed to go down the end of my street or a couple doors down. I kept pushing it and pushing it, and finally I started going down the park, like towards the end of the summer. So I remember being in the park this day, and it was getting close to 5 p.m. It's time for me to go home. And I had been in and out all day. And so I was on my way home, and I wanted to ride through the footpath that goes through the wooded section of the park. So it was more of the scenic route. I could have took the short way, but I didn't. So I went into the entrance, to the wooded path, and immediately I started getting scared to the point where it was an irrational fear. And I thought that there was going to be teenagers further up the trail, because on the left-hand side there was a rope swing and like an area where they had actually cleared the trees out because they built a fort back there. So the fort was there. It was off in the distance, and the woods a little bit hidden. And they had the rope swing, and there was a fallen pine tree that was next to the trail. So I'm scared to death, and I haven't even seen anybody. So something's up here. And it was the same fear that I had in my bedroom. And it wasn't until years later that I made the association between the two. So I'm riding closer, and the closer I get to where these people are standing, the worse I feel. And I don't even see them yet. But once I get up on them, I had this plan. Because I could feel that they were there. I was going to just ride by and not make eye contact, but that didn't happen, because when I got close enough to see them, They were wearing navy blue pullovers and navy blue pants. They all had what appeared to be the same shoes, but they weren't anything that they weren't tennis shoes. I don't know what kind of shoes they were, but they kind of blended in with the ground. So I didn't really have time to look, but they were all dressed identically. They're all the same height. They were at least 6 feet, and they were very tall, very spindly, and they had what looked like masks on, and they had their hoods pulled up. So I immediately, it was a curiosity at this point because, I thought it was like maybe there was like a blue ninja group and the kids in the neighborhood, the teenagers were meeting up dressing like blue ninjas. I don't know what it was, but I glanced over and I saw the one take, like, it looked like you know how the Nazis like marched on, they'd put their legs way out and they'd step with their knees completely outstretched with, their legs in a rigid
Yeah,
position. Well, that's what the one did. It was he must have
the good
stepped, I don't
step.
know, 6 feet. Yeah. And it was weird the way he stepped, and they all had their hands in their pockets. So he stepped, and then I looked, and as I looked, I could see the one that was closest to me in the middle behind the tree. And he turned, and I saw half the face, and it looked like a ski mask, but it had a big almond shaped eye that had a white, like white trim around it to actually make it more noticeable. And I only saw half the face. And as soon as the individual looked at me, I had a jolt of fear shoot through my stomach. The point, it's the kind of fear when somebody jumps out from like behind something and really catches you off guard. And I had that hit me, and then I was already anxious. But as that fear hit me, something hit me in the back of the head. It felt like energy, and it had more of like a slow moving, viscous feel to it. It kind of ran down my back, down right down my spine, right down, to my rear end. And I just remember being like incredibly scared, and I pedaled my way out of the park and got home, and I didn't talk about it because what am I going to tell? What am I going to say? The ninjas almost got me. So, but what happened later, actually, what really happened was, and this wasn't until years later, just not that long ago, actually, where this actually came out. After I did a hypnosis session, I had some of the fragments of the memory came back. I was riding in. When I saw them, they hit me in the back of the head with some kind of energy. I came to a complete stop and I froze. At which point I levitated off the bicycle, and I and the bicycle floated together through the trees, and I lost consciousness, and it turned into a light blue color, and it felt incredibly comfortable. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't feel any pain. I didn't feel any discomfort, no anxiety. I just felt like somebody wrapped me up in like a blanket and was holding me and just carrying. I was just floating away. It was like a very carefree feeling, a lot like what people describe in a near-death experience. Then I remember coming back and floating back in and being placed on my bicycle, not by them, but basically by the levitation, whatever the technology was, it literally put me back in the same position I was. And then I rode out of there. And as I was floating in, I saw seven ETs with white, chalk white skin, large bulbous heads, still had their hoods on, but I could see their faces now. They weren't wearing any masks. It was just the way their faces looked. The one may have had one, or it maybe have been part of an edited memory where they put in a mask on them. I don't know, but they had their arms outstretched in a circle, and their arms were overlapping, and there was a white light above them, and it looks like they were either being teleported or being pulled up into a ship. I don't know, but there was no missing time. There was no scars. There was nothing to indicate that anything happened to me. Just this weird memory that never made any sense. And it wasn't so much later that I figured this out. Now, getting back to that original memory that I was in the lab, this is where things get to be a little bit, I don't know, in some ways controversial, because what I found is when I was supposed to be a teacher, I wasn't supposed to like be a teacher like in a school. I wasn't referring to something I'd done in the past because I had been through so many different scenarios and what this was. And the supposed extraterrestrials that I was talking to through V2K was actually, they were very deceptive because they weren't extraterrestrials at all. They were actually people that work for, believe it or not, the telecom industry that is tied to the military industrial complex. They're the ones giving you the V2K, and there's black budget programs and evolve this industry that, and the V2K, the microwave transmissions and all that come from the cell towers now, the 5G tower. So back then they had the Gwen towers, and of course there was alien technology as well that they had access to. So they were able to do this. And so in that lab setting, when I was complaining or protesting about being a teacher and how am I going to be a teacher if I can't talk, how am I going to make a living and so forth, what I found out years later is that, and they use this against me to try to get me to do this as like a form of leverage. I was supposed to be a spiritual teacher. I was supposed to be somebody that would be reaching adulthood in the 90s to around 2000, to where I would start being either most likely a new age influencer. Could have been the occult as well. I don't know, but I think it was a new age influencer. So this is the interesting thing, because under Project IBIS, one of the things that IBIS does that few people talk about, because unfortunately a lot of them who talk publicly are actually doing something for the IBIS program simply by talking and giving their disclosure, or spreading a new age belief system or spreading an occult belief system, is that they will take certain people that they have used in the past or have a certain personality profile that are good at this. They're influential, they have charisma, and they will activate their psychic abilities, and they will turn them into what I refer to as a social implant, which is a social influencer. And the social influencers go out and they become what I would call a mass handler for the general, I wouldn't say the general population, but for the targeted audience, the targeted population. So the targeted population would be people that identify as star seeds, MyLabs, extraterrestrial abduction victims, and anything that kind of fits into that genre. And just people in general who would be interested in an alternative religious belief system. So this is where the IBIS program kind of like leaves the typical storyline where you have basically the manipulation of timelines. You have all of the different super soldier stuff and psychic abilities, and all that's tied in. But there's a part of this that really doesn't get talked about, which is the actual the use of mind controlled MyLabs as social influencers. So that's what I was initially supposed to be, but because of reasons that really had to do with me and my personality type, and with the problems that they had with me, because later on, and I don't have memories of this, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. This is recent information that I got. This was after I made contact with my handlers, is that I've been here 2 lifetimes, starting in the 1940s, which would have put me in a perfect position to unfortunately be part of every single MyLab program that they ever had, going back to 1946, when they claimed that I was apprehended and put here as a prisoner. And from then I was used in the programs, and I've been here through 2 lifetimes. I do have some vague memories of the first one. I had brown hair, was a male. I lived in the state of Nevada, and I lived to about 27 years of age. And learning a little bit more about the whole MyLab situation is that when they kill you before 30, you're considered a sleeper. So you're never really given enough time to wake up. They never initiate an awakening of any kind. You never remember anything. You just live a normal life, maybe with some unusual occurrences happening. And then if you're living back in the 40s and 50s and 60s and so forth to the early 70s, you couldn't talk about this stuff anyway, even if something anomalous was happening to you, because there just wasn't enough people to believe it. The information wasn't out. There was a heavy disinfo campaign by the government. So if you talked about UFOs, they associated you with little green men from Mars, and you were made fun of. Nobody took you seriously. And and those people back then that came forward took a lot of heat. They took a lot of flack for it, because it's just it's associated with craziness. It just isn't. It's this that wasn't a good environment to talk about these things. So the chances of waking up
Yeah.
are slim to none, especially if they take you out early. I'm sorry, go ahead, Don.
You actually hit on several things that I would love your opinion on. One of the memories that my parents told me was just make believe, because I watched some new sci-fi movies. It was the early 80s and they were all pumping them out, right?
Right.
I had an experience where I woke up. I don't even remember completely opening my eyes or if I did. And I heard a voice in my head. I lived on the second story of an old farmhouse in rural Ontario. And the voice told me how to walk out of my house from the second story. I'd have been about 5 or 6 years old, how to get down the stairs without making a noise. They walked me through everything. I opened the old creaky farm door. It didn't make a damn sound. Out the front door to two white entities. I think they were people, beings, I don't know, and a silver mercury circle. And then the next thing I remember is being in a government type building that somewhat reminds me of a public school with those white, shiny floors with the speckles in them and
Mhm.
white walls, being taken into a medical room, being hooked up with hundreds and hundreds of diodes to my head, hearing the voice in my head again say, I'm sorry, you're going to need this. And it was just an overload of information. And then I woke up and it was the morning. When I tried to tell my parents about it, of course, it was because I watched a space movie. The only problem was my socks were wet and my pajamas were dirty.
Right. And that was before Nightmare on Elm Street too, so you can't blame Freddy getting you
No,
so dirty. So what was your question? I mean, that sounds exactly like the kind of crap that I was dealing with, but what I can't remember.
I had always written it off as I had an encounter with like an alien or, and then after through my hypnosis I learned that that was actually my first bit of SSP training. I went through a series of hypnosis as well, and what I actually ended up figuring out is in my existence here I traded my service there. I literally traded my consciousness in 2200 for the shit that woke me up with the nightmares and stuff that I'm not going to ramble on about, to be here right now to help with this.
Okay.
That's why I was woken up by the nightmares so I could start awakening my consciousness to all of these things and trying to help people understand it, because I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing at this stage of my life in this identity. And the two seem very closely connected because as soon as that happened, this started happening.
Yeah, well, what that sounds like is similar to what I've been through, and a lot of us go through that as they have. It's an engineered awakening by the programs, by those who are running the programs. So um, this is where people have a hard time understanding, I think, because there's two ways to go about. Well, there's three ways to go about this. Either you don't wake up at all, and you just have a couple paranormal experiences, things you can't figure out, or or you have a full-blown mind lab experience and you have incredible memory recall and so on and so forth. You write books and everything, and that's what people think about when they think like somebody. There's many names that I could give. And then you have the people that kind of fall in the middle there, which you have some paranormal experiences, but you have a lot of spiritual experiences, and oftentimes you'll start getting contact. But I mean, there's a whole. I can't put everybody in like three little categories, but it's just a wide spectrum of experience. But for me, I didn't get the typical my lab stuff. I got more of the spiritual side of it. So um, that's why I'm a little bit different. But I mean, it's the same thing. They create an engineered awakening because one, they know you're going to wake up to some degree or another. It's going to bleed through. They can't keep all this trauma. They can't keep it. They can't keep it contained. And there's another aspect of this, which is the higher self, which really is comprised of every piece of you, every version of you that's on a timeline that you're not hijacked, is how I would identify my higher self. The rest of is under their control, so they've got dominion over those parts of me. But the parts of me that are free are trying to get the rest of me out of this situation. Same with you, Don, and anybody else out there in this situation. Um, they want their whole. I mean, they want the whole being, every part of their self, in this mass consciousness that each of us possess across all these timelines and different places, to be free. So they will influence us and they will push those memories out, and we will have knowing of things, but the programs will push back. So it's this push and pull, tug of war struggle going on inside to wake up and try to get ourselves out of this versus them attempting to shut us down. So what they do a couple different things. They can put, if they really don't want you to remember and they have no reason for you to come up and just recall any of the stuff that you've done in these programs, they'll give you a really structured spiritual deception type of program to live in. And you may never wake up, and you'll have spirit guides, and you'll have all these different things happening to you, but you'll never associate yourself with who you really are. And it's a way of keeping you from who you really are, and keeping you asleep, but in a different way. And they can engineer a completely false awakening within that construct of the new age or occult, because now you're awakening to all these spiritual abilities, these spiritual powers. You see the world in a different way. And for most people, it can be something that pacifies them so that they never pursue anything further. They never ask those questions like, well, why is all this happening, and why is it structured this way? Why do we have spirit guides? I mean, I think, frankly, I've never had a decent experience with a spirit guide because it's always been program related. And there's other people that say they have great experiences with them, others that say they were great and then they go bad because it was some kind of a deception. The jury's out with me. I mean, they could be angelic, they could work for God, and they could be here to help people who need it. I frankly have never had any contact with any of them. I had one come through in a session recently and tell me that he'll always be there for me, but yet he isn't. And he even said himself, he's like, I think you got this. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I got it, because you're not going to be involved in it. I'm not going to play that game because I don't trust anything like that. I've been through so many deceptions in that regard that, even when a loved one comes through, I scrutinize. And this is when I have contact or anything like that, or somebody comes through a channeling session. It can be very powerful and emotional, but there's still a part of me that says, wait a minute, how many times have you been deceived? It's time to really look at this and scrutinize it and take it with a grain of salt, even though it hurts. So anyway, get back to the whole thing. So I went from that point in my life of having that memory of being in that soul transference lab, and I didn't really know what it was until later. But the crazy thing is that I kept having these spiritual experiences, and they didn't stop. I mean, every year I remember thinking back, like, how many did I have this year? There were some years where I had maybe one or two experiences, others where I had multiple, and some really profound ones. I had one where my grandmother cut her finger at work, and I was still living at home with them. My wife, who I wasn't married at the time, but we were together. This is before we got married, and she was filling out all of her bills on the futon, and I answered the phone, and it was a call from my grandfather. I go out to get him. I give him the phone, but the problem is when I stood up to get to go in the other room to give him the phone, I had a full blown vision of my grandmother being in an emergency room. I saw it was an image, and it was like a white haze around it, and I had a voice of someone that I identified as one of these supposed life engineers, but it was a V2K military handler. It was a female that I was assigned to for the early part of my life. And she very sternly said, your grandmother is in the hospital. She hurt her finger. And I bursted out in tears. I was really, really emotional. I had a lot of emotions come out of me. And it was the first time that I had a really intense telepathic communication. So when we went to pick, her up, I took the plate. I mean, I went to get her. And so when we went to get her, we went into the it was like a work clinic, and where they do urinalysis or walk-in medical emergencies and so forth. And so went to the nurse's counter. They showed us into this room, and it was a small emergency room area for injuries. And they opened the door up. It was exactly what I saw in the vision. And I couldn't contain myself. I started to break down and cry when she was trying to explain to me how to take care of her finger, what she needed to do. So my wife had to take over at the time. Actually, she was my girlfriend at the time. But so that was just one example of things that happened to me, and it just built up over a long period of time. And then I had this particular incident where I was prescribed Singulair as an allergy drug, and this was like I think 2002, roughly around there. And I started taking this drug, and I started having weird symptoms. I was getting fatigued from it. went back to the doctor and I told him, he says, you shouldn't be feeling fatigue. Keep an eye on it. Well, a couple of days later, I had a violent allergic reaction to this drug, and my muscles locked up to the point where I couldn't move, and I could barely breathe, and I was in and out of the hospital 3 different times until they figured out what it was. The last day I was there, I started having empathic and telepathic psychic events that were sporadic, and it would happen with strangers and then just about anybody. There was an incident that took place in a hospital with a man who was laying in a room in my last day there, and he was covered in lesions, and I felt his pain and I started crying. That happened, and I had various incidents that took place over a 3-week period. And just as quickly as this started, it turned right off, like somebody had turned it off with a switch. And this was the problem throughout my life, is that I would have psychic experiences, but I had never had control over it. And then they would be turned off just as quickly as they came on and activated. So I knew that somebody somewhere was controlling my psychic abilities. And I always wondered as a child why we weren't all psychic, why some people were. And then when I looked into it, why those people that were claiming to be psychic could never actually prove their abilities. At least that's what it appeared to be. But later I found out, several decades later, is that, those who have psychic abilities are in government programs, and it's a big cover up. The Stanford Research Institute has declassified documents out on the CIA.gov that prove that there are people that have been put into research studies that actually have real psychic abilities, but it's covered up by the government. They don't want, it's the threat to national security. And that's really the premise of Project IBIS. One of the bigger portions of it is to preserve the continuity of the government by suppressing an incoming ET threat that's actually positive extraterrestrials incarnating in human bodies, or prisoners of the negative ETs that are put here as well, that are used under contract to the US military. So they exploit people like us and put us into these programs, and they turn their opposition into the foot soldiers that preserve the prison planet and preserve the negative ET empire, or whatever it is that's controlling this planet. I'm not privy to the names, I'm not privy to the structure of how this works, but I know there's a pretty vast interconnected group of different groups of ETs that are working together to maintain this slave planet, the slave prison planet, for at least 1 million years. And they're the ones that have engineered or created the religions. And this is the reason why you can look at Mars and see the iconography there is identical to what we have here. You can see Mayan ruins, Egyptian ruins. It's one big program. That was another prison planet before they used it for something else. And here we are looking at this and saying, why are we seeing ruins of pyramids on Mars? And we're trying to make the connection between what we have here on the ground and what this evidence really means. And what it means is there's a spiritual occupation of basically a soul prison that's been put down on this planet. And a lot of different groups get something out of this. It's a very self-serving arrangement. And humanity comes out on the short end of the stick. And what is humanity? Very, very likely just a grouping of prisoners and people that are put here with some souls who were born here. And we're all here under a state of amnesia. We have no history. We have no collective history going back more than 6,000 years. We have no history of our own personal selves. We have a mind wipe going on. So they've erased our collective memory of self, our individual memory of self. And they put us under a state of amnesia where we get to fight over religious belief systems. And they've set up a hierarchy of handlers in society that, the governments are handling the prison population. They're basically the prison gangs, the wardens of the ETs, and it's one big planetary prison system from what I could see. Now, there's other aspects of this that are mysterious, difficult to understand, such as the spirit world. And what I've concluded there, what I'm seeing is a consciousness simulation. This is how they've explained it to me. We're in an augmented reality bound by 5 senses that's nested. So there's different nested layers to the simulation. And in those different nested layers, there's groupings of people or entities. Some are taking advantage of this, such as parasitic beings, because they're able to come here, colonize, and feed off the population. And then they're used in programs too by the extraterrestrials. And so you have that going on. So you have this environment where we can be fed upon. It's funny because, and I'm jumping around here a little bit. I'm getting off of my story a bit, but I just wanted to make a point. You know, animals are more psychic than people, and in an overall general way. Animals have been observed in zoos being able to detect an earthquake, and they'll huddle together in little groups before the earthquake hits. I remember seeing it was one of the, I think it was in Southern California earthquake, one of the larger ones that took place about 20 years ago. And I remember, and it's hard to find stuff like this online now because it's came and it's went. But they had, I actually saw it on the news. It wasn't even online that I saw it, and they had animals huddling together just before an earthquake, and they can pick this up. We can't. I mean, we can walk out. I mean, I could walk out tomorrow. I'm not the best example, but somebody else could walk out of their house tomorrow and get hit by a bus in some anomalous accident that there was no evidence of it. You know, they didn't see anything coming. An animal may be able to sense that. I know that animals that are used for prey are less psychic from what I've observed than those who are more intelligent, you know, because the predator needs the advantage. If the prey could sense the danger, they'd never get eaten, except for rare circumstances. So I think there's a hierarchy of intelligences there, and with each level of that hierarchy, you have increased psychic abilities. But when you get to humans, it's pretty much nothing. I mean, you know, obviously somebody's got our numbers, somebody's controlling things, somebody's making sure that only certain people can be psychic, and the ones who do are under control. And that's what I've found. One of the craziest things that has ever been said to me by these handlers is when I said, "Why did you make me sick all of my life? Why did you do all these things to me?" This is after years of, this is years later after I got through the spiritual deception aspect of this and the ET stuff. They said it's preserved the continuity of the government. And here I am, you know, I'm thinking to myself, I'm such a threat. And you know, I'm a threat. You're a threat, Don, and all of us are a threat in this community because they see us as agents of change. They see us as having the ability to transform this world, make it a better place. And, you know, they don't want that. They want to keep this going. And people like us that are using these programs are prized prisoners because they can fracture our consciousness and utilize us and farm us out, make copies of us, and just use us as slave labor and whatever else they want to do. So getting back to the whole thing, what happened
One
after
second.
sure.
One sec. Before we get away from that simulation thing you were talking about, it's something Karen Holton, who's actually in the audience, and I have been talking about in all this Matrix stuff. Do you believe, or what's your take on the system of control or the enslavement, the control that's been controlling us for years, is actually using us as beings because they know we are creator beings? Because you and I both know humans project frequency, which interacts with the environment. Are these people or beings unable to create for themselves and enslave us and make us, like something that started in 2020, create their own reality? They have to keep us vibrating so low, but high enough that we create for them, is,
Well,
I guess, what I'm asking.
from what I understand is that they, okay, like I said, there's a hierarchy here. You have, if you go down the food chain, you have, you know, the prey animals, and you got, you know, the predators and stuff. And once you get up into the intelligent, you know, level, where, you know, that's when things get a little bit more complicated. From what I understand is, and this is going through years of trying to figure this out, is they have what you call angelics. And there's a storyline going on out there that this is a caste system. They're created that way. That's more of the theological point of view. I don't see it that way. What I feel intuitively in my own soul is that anyone could reach that point of serving, you know, the will of the creator. You have to free yourself of the ego. There's a lot of things, not completely free yourself of the ego. Ego preserves who you are as a personality and as a being. You have to have some ego to preserve yourself, but you have to be somebody that has, you know, made a decision over a long period of time, you know, to serve the greater good. And I think that's where the angels come from. So I think over a long period of time, the very ancient souls reach that point. And it's kind of like, it's a type of evolution that you can make a decision. It isn't, you don't have to do it. You don't have to serve others, and you can be self-serving. So the ones that fall short of that, you can call them, the negative, or the regressives, or whatever you want to call them. They're more service to self oriented. So they would be in a lower pecking order. What I'm getting at is that when it comes to regular people, like regular human beings that are just regular, any kind of being that isn't on that level, say the angelics, they still have something to use them for. They're going to, these ET empires, from what I can see, they want to have dominion and control over what they think is lesser species. So they're more than happy to come in here and enslave an entire population and use them. The Greys, for example, have been remote viewed by the Farsight Institute. And the old story was that there's two stories going on with the Greys. One is that they were simply programmed life forms. There was just, it was kind of like a thought form, like a soul that wasn't quite a soul that was programmed into them to animate them. And then you have the ones that say, well, then you have the other alternative storyline. It says that they were a species, just regular people that cloned themselves and were doing experiments and wound up destroying their genetic health, and they became the way they are. And then you have what Farsight came out with, which is that the reptilians attacked a planet full of people and completely wiped them out. They took as many prisoners as they could, and they turned them into biological androids under controlled state of consciousness, much like they're doing with it's the same exact thing they've done with the MyLabs. It's just that they're in a much, much more controlled state, to where they're not even their self anymore. They have very little memory or anything of their self left. It's just programmed orders that they carry out. So they become just like a robot. But there's an actual soul in torment and hell inside that body, being used for that purpose. I talked to Courtney Brown after an interview, and he also mentioned a little bit during the interview that he was one of the refugees from this event. That he and his wife, and actually Yemi Janae was also one of the ones, and her daughter too. So this is, Farsight is actually a collection of people that were part of that horrible planetary holocaust that resulted in the Greys coming into existence as slaves to various different extraterrestrial groups. And that's what they're using humanity for, is that type of level of slave. But when you get into the more higher developed spiritual beings, they say the angelics, and anything that's below that, in between where you would look at the average person, and that somewhere in the middle there, it's the angelics that I understand that can create new realities. They can create the timelines, and they're the prized slave of the system. They're the ones that they want to do all the fighting with. And so it would be the people that are, the MyLabs, the ones that are used for the high end purposes, the high end uses. They would be the ones like you're talking about, Don, that can create and do the things that these other beings can't. The main difference is because they're not connected with God. You can put it in a very simplistic way. They don't have that level of connection, but they want to do what the angelics can do. So they have to hijack them, take them prisoner, put them under a controlled state of consciousness using tech, and force them to do the dirty work that they can't do themselves. And that's where all of these projects come in, and these programs that I'm talking about that stops the bleed through and the waking up process of the slaves that they're using. So they have to create ways of keeping us in line. And I always say that these negative self-serving ET groups are some of the hardest workers out there. They have amazing work ethic, because like any pathological liar that weaves a web of lies, they have to work extremely hard to make sure that they tie up all the loose ends and there's nothing that exposes them. So it's a lot of work being a liar. You have to remember what you say. You got to do a lot of work to cover your rear end. And but they use us to do that. So they use the victims to actually victimize the victims in this system. And it's like that in politics. It's like that it's the entire planet is set up like that. If you take the handler, if you take kind of like the structure that I guess I can talk about now, of like the handlers, you can see how they've set up a prison system using that. But anyway, getting back to the stuff that I was talking about they were going to use me to be a new age influencer. Um, what happened to me is that once I got to close to 30 years of age, I had a relatively normal life. I had some pretty bad spine issues and things like that. They were starting to destroy my spine, and they were putting me in a situation where I couldn't work, and I got hurt on the job, and I herniated 3 discs. So I was out of work, and I was being completely denied. I was being targeted now. So now I'm a full blown targeted individual. The system is against me. I can't get workman's comp. I got lawyers quitting on me. I've got all these things going on. I'm fighting for medical treatments. Took a year and a half just to see a doctor from the date of injury. So I've got all these problems going on now. Now they've got me in a situation where I'm home and I've got a lot of time on my hands and I'm very stressed out. So my life has now hit bottom, and I've had all these paranormal experiences throughout my life. So now the programs have got me set up and primed in the perfect position, because now I've got time on my hands and I've got a lot of time to do research. So the next thing that happened, I had that reaction to the drug Singular, and I had those 3 weeks of I had all those psychic experiences, and then it turned right off. And I had a psychic, or actually I had a V2K communication. It said, you need to find people who are like you, and they're on the internet. And here I'm thinking this is to me, this is a divine source. This is a spiritual. I mean, I'm getting like communication from someone. And when you get communication like that, regardless if you just hear a voice, regardless of how it comes through, you take it seriously. I mean, this is a spirit. I mean, I felt like that I was on some kind of spiritual quest after I got this information. So I started to look, and I spent hours and hours a day doing research and trying to find out what was going on with me. At this point, I was in like, it was really serious, because I had so many things happen to me and I needed to know the truth, and I was being subconsciously pushed. I came up with some terms: subconscious psychic networking and subconscious psychic programming. This would be your classic psychic, subconscious psychic programming event. And then the networking comes in when you find people like yourself and they network you together with them. 2 or more people is what you would call psychic networking. And that's when they start to put together groups and so on. So here I was trying to find answers. I'm on the internet all the time looking. I've read books throughout my life, just trying to decipher what's going on. I was always attracted to Egypt, UFOs, the whole thing. So I got to the point where I had been through just about every place. I fooled with the New Age a little bit. The one place I didn't look was the occult, and I kept coming back to this. I kept being drawn back to it because it was the last place that I hadn't looked. And so I started looking. One night I looked up Satanism, and lo and behold, one of the first websites that showed up was the Joy of Satan. And I looked at it and I'm like, that's an oxymoron. It's like the joy of Satan. It's like the joy of Hitler. I don't see any joy in this, but I was attracted to the name because something was different about it. And it was really the programming. So I go into the website and I start reading it. There's big part of that website is exposing Christianity. And I read the whole thing back to back. And I had already been going through a period of time where I considered myself a spiritual atheist. I got into astrotheology. I was reading books by, I think her name was Akara S. It's an alias. I don't remember, but she had several really thick books, linking all these different Messiah figures together with solar mythos and stuff like that. And so I was learning about all of that. I was learning that there wasn't just one Redeemer Messiah. There was at least 17 in the historical record. So I kind of just like pushed out. I kind of got away from all the religion, and I was just considering myself a spiritual atheist at this point. I had no theology, but I was having these experiences. So I wasn't an atheist by any shape of the imagination or any scope of the imagination, because I was having real experiences. I felt that I was different, but I couldn't relate to them. So I was in a class by myself. And so anyway, I go into this website and I start reading, and now I'm learning about the Anunnaki. And what I found is the Anunnaki story is used by the extraterrestrials as a kind of a stepping off from the mainstream religion. It becomes sort of the religion of the New Age, sort of the religion of the ET contactee. It's like once you learn about the Anunnaki, everything starts to make sense. Where before it never made sense because, where are these beings that you're having the experiences with? It doesn't fit in with the biblical story. You can't go to your pastor, your priest, whatever. Nobody, they're going to tell you it's evil spirits. No one's equipped to give you the answers. But all of a sudden, here's Zachariah Sitchin, and here's this incredible story that makes so much sense. So I'm pulled into that story. But in the midst of that story, there's an occult mind control structure here that's being laid out to me. So it's got the Nazi element in there, which I was avoiding, but it was actually part of the website. There was a companion website that was glorifying the Nazi regime that was all part of this cult. But it was like it was done in such a way that you had to kind of go through all the other propaganda first before you got to the Nazi stuff. And then and once you got programmed to that point, it was like, well, I can throw away the Nazi stuff or just keep it, whatever. So I didn't pay much attention to that. And that's part of the mind control, because normally that should have set off the red flag. I'm like, I need to get out of this. This is bad. This is absolutely horrible. Heinrich Himmler was not a humanitarian, but he was portrayed as a humanitarian on this website, But you're caught up in this shit. So it's like you're lying. Mind control is really about getting a person to lie to themselves more than it is even programming them. Is something's got to keep that programming going, and it's the lies you tell to yourself to keep it going. So I got into this, and I decided, okay, I approached there all sorts of people before. I never got any help. So I decided to email the high priestess who who created the website. What I didn't know is that she was married to a person who was high up in the supposed American Nazi Party, which is just an organization of people holding on to the past and holding on to racism and segregation and living in the middle of right in the middle of the Bible Belt. They were in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And what I found out is you'll find this fairly funny, Don, is that the American Nazi Party was sharing the same P.O. box as the Joy of Satan. So as you can imagine, the people at the post office had one hell of a P.O. box in their hands. So you think their mail? Do you think their mail came on time? So I don't think so. Anyway, you're on mute, by the way. I can't hear you. So
oh shit, sorry.
Yeah, you can talk anytime you want. You can interrupt me and ask whatever you want to ask. But I remember talking to this lady. Her name was Maxine, and her real name was Andrea Harrington. And Cliff Harrington was her husband, who was in the Nazi Party. And people referred to them as the Hollywood Nazis because they would dress up like Hitler's men, and they would go out and have a small protest, and everybody would throw shit at them. And they run them out of town, and they would kind of go away. I don't even know if they're even doing rallies anymore. I was never into that. I always very repulsed by it. But anyway, I emailed this woman, and then unlike everybody else, she rolled out the red carpet to me and was like very attentive and answered all of my questions and spent a lot of time with me, which was unusual. So for the next couple of weeks, I was exchanging emails. I told her about some of the things that have happened to me. And, everything was in a very theological context. So when I began to talk about the soul transference memory, of course, she didn't understand what a MyLab was. And, she knew what ETs were because it was all part of the composite theology. But, she said your chakras are open. This is why you're having these psychic experiences, and that everything that you're going through is indicative of somebody. She goes, I know. She goes, I know that you've been with Satan before. And what that really was, she thought it was Satan, but in reality, it's like you're in the programs, because this entire cult was created by a MyLab victim, a woman who is married to a prominent member of the Nazi Party. I mean, unbeknownst to her, she was in the programs. She had the extraterrestrial contact. She had the past life memories, where she was married to Azazel in Egypt, and he was supposed to be like a god that walked around, one of the watchers. And so here I am, I'm being pulled into this cult. So she invites me in. The night that I decide that I'm going to join this cult, I typed her an email, and I typed the word Satan, and it was the name Satan. I just hit the letter S. This being comes into the room and touches me on my left side. It looks like a silhouette of a man wearing a headdress. and I could hear the sound of a rain stick. But the way it looked was, it was like heat coming off of a pavement in wavy, kind of a wavy silhouette. And it came in and it charged me up. I was really stoned at the time. I took a lot of bong hits that night, maybe 7 or 8, so I was pretty toasted. And I was having pain in my tailbone from L5, which is a disc that I've had fused. But back then it was a disc that was completely damaged. And so so anyway, I had pain. When I got touched by this being, the pain went away and I felt high for 5 days. I had an energy high, and the intoxication I had was instantly gone the moment I was touched. So I had this weird experience, and I'm not going to get into the whole experience, but I saw this being later, a little while. It was a little while later. I was trying to go to bed and get everything together, and I saw this being run past me in the dark and run into a wall from left to right. And at that point, that was a sign to me, because I said, okay, either these are the beings that I've been in contact with, that have had passive, that I've been having passive contact with all of my life, or it's a new group. And if it's a new group, then where are the old ones? So if I'm really getting into something that's terrible, because it's all wrapped in a satanic wrapper, where are the good guys? It doesn't feel like the good guys and the bad guys are really bad at all. It seems like it's just the same group. So I went with it. I went with this incredibly powerful intuitive push that I had inside me to go and join this cult. So I decided to do it. And at that point, I was invited into the group. Within a couple of days, I don't even think it was that long, I posted a story about, which I called a strange experience. I talked about that entity coming in, and I saw it as a sign that I was in the right place. And so immediately I was recruited into a spiritual warfare group. It was called the Order, and this is where I had my first handler, because the way this is set up, Don, is that they would break us off into spiritual warfare groups. The spiritual warfare group would always be headed by a handler person who would have greater psychic abilities than the rest of the group. That person would be the leader, that person would be the teacher, and they would talk to the so-called demons, which are actually people working in the tech industry and in black budget programs, who, at least from the handlers that I've talked to, that I have to deal with, are actually somebody's alters. So they're actually alters of someone in society, working in these programs, working for tech companies in the telecom industry. And they're the ones doing the V2K and all the special effects to create what I call virtual temple complex cults, like the Joy of Satan. And Joy of Satan isn't unique. Unfortunately, it's not the only one. There are others out there, because when I was involved in the Joy of Satan, I found demonology groups, and there was a core segment out of every population of people or every group of people that were involved in something like this. There was a certain particular minority of them that would go through these intense MyLab type of experiences, that also included love bites and all sorts of things of that nature as well, and non-physical abductions and things. So I began to see all of these different patterns. And so I get into this situation. I'm in the spiritual warfare group. My life is turned upside down. I'm not paying attention to my wife anymore. The person, within the first day of being recruited into this cult, I meet the guy that was in the memory that I had in that soul transference lab. He was a trauma twin, and I didn't know this until years later, but he was a trauma twin in the program with me. And what they did to me is, you've heard about people being, having their personalities shifted by alters. Well,
Yeah.
I would say a good year and a half, almost maybe 2 years, 1 to 2 years before I met him, I went through a personality change. I went from being heterosexual to pansexual. They changed not only my sexual orientation, but they changed my personality. I began wearing different clothes. I had different taste. I still like the same type of foods, but there were so many different things that were different about me that took place in this shift that my wife didn't even know who I was anymore, and neither did anybody else. So this caused tremendous problems in my marriage, in relationships. And it was just like, Nathan has lost his mind. He's like a different person now. So, I mean, I look back at what I went through, and I think to myself, back. I mean, today we'd be a little bit more tolerant of, of somebody making a shift like that. But back then, it was clearly. I'm surprised that I actually kept all my friends because a lot of them are very homophobic, but here I was actually totally different person. I would have been the person they hated, but because they knew me for so long, for whatever reason, I didn't get that response from them. But it did definitely have a dramatically negative effect on my marriage, and it just affected everything from that point forward. And so here I was, and I meet this person, and instead of just knowing this, they actually put us into a love bite scenario. So this resulted in approximately 5 years of post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, because at some point, you know, he the idea was, because he was a trauma twin, to pair us up and then break us apart to where I got hurt, because I was the one that ultimately, for some reason, at least from his memories, because he had memories of us being chained up to opposite walls and they were torturing me in front of him. I always seemed to get the worst of the situation with him, at least from what I could gather. But in this situation, they engineered the love bite, and then they created a breakup where, I mean, I'm in a marriage, I've got a child, I've got all these things happening, and here I am in this situation where I'm being pulled in this direction that I don't want to go into, but I don't have any options. It was so painful that I wanted to die. And there was suicide programming going on at the same time, because they wanted us to believe that we were from, Duat, which is a place in Orion where the Egyptians came from. And this is where, the good ETs, where we're going to take all of the people that were being saved from the Galactic Federation, because that cult was an inversion of the GFL, or the Galactic Federation of Worlds concept. It was all the old pagan gods. The Watchers were coming back to reclaim humanity and save them from the GFL that had taken them had taken them hostage, hijacked them, and were using them for loosh. So it was the inversion of that whole scenario, that whole story. And one of the things leading up to this, I said I had been through a lot of different belief systems leading up to this, is that part of the theology even discussed about how people in what they call the white lighters, the people in the New Age, would be told different things and giving false information. And I studied the New Age for a long time. I studied it since I was 14. And for 36 years now, I've seen a lot of things come and go, as far as as far as doomsday predictions. There's been plenty of those. There's been plenty of false ascension events. But what was interesting is that the Joy of Satan religion preached that, that these were deceptive ETs. So if you've been paying attention to all these false ascensions and false doomsdays over the past 20, 30 years, like I had, this was where the buck stopped. The bullshit ended right here, because you were going to get the truth now. So you're not getting the same stuff that the other people are getting, the so-called white lighters. So we actually thought we were with the darkness, and the darkness is the good guys, when in reality, it's all part of the same program. And I'm not going to say it's all part of the same program, because there's positive ETs out there, but there's an obvious, substantial effort put forward to obfuscate any positive contact that takes place in the general population. And and after a while, it all looks to be negative. It's very, so that's why I'm very cautious when people say, how can I contact my guides or the spirits, or just ETs? And it's like, why would you want to do that and take the chance if they're not already bothering you? Why would you want to get involved in it? And people want to feel special, and it has a lot to do with the way the traps work, because mundane lives require just beautiful experiences to make people happy when they're unhappy. And the ETs, or the programs, or these deceptive entities that plague us, always have something to offer, if for those who are looking for it. And chances are you'll find something which is the opposite of what you hope to find in the first place when you go looking. But so here I am in this situation. I've now got a handler, and off we go. And we're having spiritual warfare events. There's we're getting attacked by angels. See, in this religion, you got attacked by grays, reptilians, and angels. They're all in the same size. I mean, all on the same side. Then you have, the gods of old, Anubis and, Ra and Zeus and Amdusius and Amy and all these different, watchers, and they're all the good guys. And they wore black, the angels wore white, and they were the enemy. So that was the whole scenario. And as I went through this experience and went through this roller coaster ride, I watched them take the handler, build them up, get their ego is repulsive and as difficult as it could possibly be to handle for everybody else. And then I watched them completely destroy that person by making them destroy their self. They exploited every one of their weaknesses and they pulled the rug out from under them, and then they just fell flat on their face, and then they would replace that handler with somebody else. Eventually there was two handlers, and then eventually it got to me, and at which point I wasn't going for any of it. I wasn't, they put me in a couple test scenarios. I wasn't showing the ego, so the entire thing just disintegrated. And as it was doing that, I was seeing clues that this thing was a ruse. And I started to tell people. And as soon as you do that, it's like, okay, you're making enemies now. Same thing in the new age community. If you start pointing out inconsistencies, eventually you get, people want to get away from you. And here I was pointing out all of these inconsistencies because I was one of the only people that I think the only person in there that I talked to that even looked for patterns and tried to make sense of this. And when I saw the inconsistencies, as I saw them, they gave me clues. They started feeding me clues. So the last time I had a spiritual warfare experience, I was being attacked by angels, but they were made out of paper, tissue paper, and they were on like cables like you'd see in a haunted house. They were coming at me, and I had this sword on the astral, and I'm whacking them up, and I'm cutting them up, and I realized they're on a hanger, and there's a cable, and it's like an amusement. It's like a haunted house thing. And
Yeah.
it was all done to show me that, yeah, this is a ruse, that this whole thing is engineered, that none of these spiritual warfare events, none of these attacks that you're getting are actually, there's no real context to it. It's a program. So at that point, I was alienated out of the group. I became the pariah. I had to get away from it. I went into a smaller subgroup, and it was called c.i.a.org. It was the Nazi free version of the Joy of Satan that some members created. And I knew some of the people in it. But once I got over there, within a couple of weeks, it was just like, he's disrespecting the gods. He doesn't believe they're actually gods. He thinks this is a ruse. So I got booted out of there. From that point, there was a situation that happened in the group where I did a succubus ritual, and actually it was an incubus ritual, but I got a succubus instead. And what happened is that I met this woman who was named, her name was c.i.a, and she looked like a 7 or 8 foot tall Paula Abdul, but her skin was darker. And she actually was a facet of the programs. I don't even think she was real. I think she was AI, but they engineered a love bite, an alien love bite, with either a handler that was masquerading using tech to be an ET, or it was just strictly AI. I do not know. But I went through 15 years of some of the most intensely abusive distractions of my life that you can imagine. I was talking to a lady named Sherry, and Sherry was in the Joy of Satan with me. I just recently heard from her. Her life's been destroyed, her health, her son has been injured. Her husband they filled his chest cavity full of tumors. They've turned her life upside down. And I've talked to a couple of people from that cult that have had their lives, their health, their physical and mental health destroyed to the point where they wouldn't do an interview. They were too afraid to expose what happened to them to save somebody else because it was that bad. And I was one of the only people, there's only been a couple that have come out of that group and have seen it for what it is, got hit pretty hard and exposed it. One of the guys' name was Richard Lester. I tried reaching out to him. He has a BitChute account. He was so bad off mentally that I couldn't even get him to do anything with me at all. I mean, he would zone out and couldn't even remember that we had a time schedule for a Zoom meeting. I finally gave up. But the reason I gave up was because when he told me that he was so high up on the pecking order that all he'd have to do is make a telepathic connection with someone, and there'd be a massive military force overthrowing the planet. As soon as I heard that, I'm like, I can't talk to this person anymore. They're no longer in reality. And that has been the situation with that cult. It is one of the most destructive types of virtual temple complex cults that I've ever seen. I've seen others, but nothing like this. Nothing where somebody leaves it in their life is forever changed and ruined, where other people around them are killed and injured as a result. In fact, there is a story. If you and I got to do a video about this, it's overdue. But there's a story on the Ontario Sun that you can look up. There's multiple articles and even there's even a short video from a local news broadcast. There was a man. I don't know his name. I don't remember his name, but if you look up Joy of Satan murder suicide, you'll find that it's pretty easy to find. And he was in a he was in a love bite with a woman in the Joy of Satan after I left it, and the girl and her mother were also in it, so they were in it together. So it was a trio of them, and their handlers, their supposed demons, they're the guardian demons that they had. It's like a guardian angel, but it's a guardian demon because it's the inversion of all the New Age and religion itself. Is that they convinced these people that they had to commit suicide to go be with Enki. Enki would be in, Duat and Orion. So they created this plan where they rented a hotel room, and the two women were supposed to take an overdose of a specific drug. At which point, the male who was in the relationship, with the daughter, was supposed to oversee their death and then commit suicide himself so they could all be with Enki in Orion. And that was the whole point. So here you have suicide programming, and you have the Anunnaki type of entity, well, the Anunnaki identity programming, because in the Joy of Satan, which is something I see in with all of the people in my labs, it's pretty much prevalent throughout the whole community, is that people will start remembering that they're Enki or Ra or Zeus or one of these pagan gods. And sometimes they'll have memories that coincide with another person. So then it becomes really hard to discount this. It's like, well, how come? Okay, so we all remember but the problem is that there's multiple Enkis, there's multiple Horuses. Some people are told that they're these beings, but never remember. Others have substantial memory recall. Others may just have some memory fragments, but it becomes a bit of an ego trap, and it becomes part of their personal identity because they have to live with this, and they have to process their everyday life and everything that's coming through as far as the program memories go. And then they have to process all that with being a god, which is difficult for the average person, especially a young person growing up, or anybody for that matter, to process all of this and to stay grounded. And ultimately, a lot of times they'll use it as an ego trap, and people will get caught up in this and then do things they normally wouldn't do because they're more susceptible to suggestion and programming because of it. But I also think too that due to the time manipulation and the way they're able to control our consciousness, that these memories could very well be real for most of the people experiencing them, because they could create 100 Enkis in an engineered timeline, or 1,000 of them, or there could be 1,000 Amdusius type characters running and thinking I'm Amdusius or Amy or some of the other names of the Watchers, for example, or other or Veracocha too. You could be told that or have memories of that. They can literally put you into that persona and make you go through an experience, and then that's what you're recalling. So it could very well be real. It's just happening in an engineered timeline scenario. So it isn't like there's just one Enki. There could be many of them, and all of these could be real memories. So we can't discount this as just being false memory, like false memory implants, because it appears to me that there's more to it than what actually meets the eye. But the Joy of Satan had every single aspect of that. It had people remembering that they were, a pagan god. You had the handlers. You also had the healers. The healers in every spiritual warfare group, you would have a handler and a healer. The healer would always help you when you got injured, when you got attacked by the angels or the grays or whatever it was. And you see that a lot. You see that same pattern in the new age as well. There's usually a healer. So you have the handlers and you have the healers and you have the followers and so on and so forth. But so what I really experienced is that I experienced another side of this MyLab experience where I could see how the programs were using MyLabs to socially engineer other MyLabs and keep them under control by giving them belief systems that they would go into. And because they were having reinforcing psychic experiences, no matter how outlandish the belief system was, the person bought into it and fully believed it to be true, just like I did. And it's very difficult to get through that, especially when it becomes abusive. And I had substantial abuse. Now, going back to my early part of my life, when I was 7, this is about a year after my abduction, I started having behaviors that I shouldn't have had. I never had any molestation in my, when I was a kid. I was never molested. I was never physically abused. There was times where you could say, yeah, it was emotional abuse because I was raised by my grandparents, not my mom. So there was a 2 household situation going on, and that's never good for the child. But at the same time, I was literally having horrible, like self-destructive bondage fantasies involving like things that I don't even want to talk about, things that you would find in people's testimony that are inside dumbs going through this monarch programming where they take the union between two people, a consensual thing that's completely beautiful and wonderful. It's just two people coming together, making love, and they turn it into an absolute nightmare scenario that you'd find in the movie Saw or any of the horror movies, any of like Hellraiser, for example. That's the type of crap that they put people through. And that's the garbage that was coming out of me that at 7 years of age, this was coming out of me. And later in life, what they would do is they'd amplify your sex drive to the point where you couldn't control it. You had no sexual release after orgasm, and you were forced in a kind of a perpetual behavior cycle that was self-destructive. It could, for a lot of people, it involves multiple partners and never any commitment, just misery, STDs. I mean, anything's possible. Usury of all kinds, and then of course then you have, then they could isolate you and make you self-destructive, where you have sex with yourself and do terrible things to yourself, and they'll put you through cycles. With me, they would put me through a cycle when my sex drive was like incredibly hard to deal with, and then it would plummet. And what I found was my face would break out because they were actually jacking up my testosterone production and then plummeting it to the point where there was like a kind of a cool down period. And during that cool down period, if I thought about anything that happened to me during that period where all this was happening, it would start again. So it was like I had to police my thoughts. And during this time, I was getting fake ET contact through V2K. These are like, and this was, c.i.a and other characters that were coming through. There was c.i.a, there was Ashtari. Ashtari and c.i.a were supposed to be spouses that I had from an extraterrestrial union. c.i.a was a spirit guide that was assigned to me by the Galactic Federation. So I was under this kind of like new age hybrid thing that was born out of the joy of Satan kind of thing. And you're in it, and there's other people involved, and of course there's plenty of people in the new age. So I felt, that there was no reason to question anything, even though I was being abused and things were happening to me. Because when it came down to the sexual abuse, their explanation is that you're in an engineered lifetime. It's for therapeutic purposes. The joy of Satan aspect was a social experiment that allowed us to initiate contact using Satanism or Enki, or the Enki or Anunnaki belief system. Excuse me, I'm just going to call it the Anunnaki religion. We use the Anunnaki religion with a combination of Satanism as a means of bridging a gap to you so that we could initiate contact in a controlled set of conditions using a theological facade, because it was easier to initiate contact that way than just showing up and saying, hi, how are you? We're extraterrestrials and you're our family member. So I was under this impression that I was here under therapeutic for therapeutic reasons, and they were using trauma-based therapies like the sexual stuff that they were doing to me and other things, as well as inflicting pain and suffering. Because as they said, they actually told me this one time, pain is therapeutic. And if pain is therapeutic, that is clearly something that you would find someone saying in these U.S. military and other military MyLab programs under IBIS and Alpha and all the rest of them. For them, in their opinion, pain is therapeutic. So
Yeah.
the joy of Satan, really what it turned into and what it became, from what I can understand of it, is that it is a program under Project IBIS. It is one of many. There's many out there, and each one is a bit different. And some are worse than others. But the goal of it is to use mind-controlled MyLabs as mass handlers and to create a hierarchy of control within our community. And you see this, and this is where I get in trouble, because a lot of the people that that will hear this message are going to some people are going to question and say, okay, well, I'm following a certain starseed influencer. Am I is he saying I'm in a virtual temple complex? You very well could be. It doesn't even need to be a big operation. It could just be a handler with a specific belief system that's taken you under their wing and is basically programmed you for the further programs. And this happens. There's plenty of different deceptions that you can find yourself in, and here you are thinking you're completely free and clear, because after I left the Joy of Satan, I was put in through one deception after another, and the whole purpose of it was to keep me from linking myself to the MyLab programs. Even though my experiences were very MyLab oriented with the abuse level and the soul transference and everything, I wasn't able to put two and two together until much later in my life. And it happened when I started to go public to a tremendous amount of opposition, not just from the programs themselves and the supposed spiritual forces I was dealing with, but from the actual community itself. Because when I got into this community, when I talk about mass handlers, well, that's what we have. It's just that it isn't so clear cut. I could point out how the Joy of Satan uses a high priestess or a high priest as a mass handler. And it's very easy to see because it's socially acceptable to look at Satanism in a negative light. But when I look at it and I say, okay, let's take a look at, the patterns here. Let's look at the New Age ET influencer, let's look at that genre, and you'll see the same patterns present that I saw in the Joy of Satan. Every influencer has a slightly different belief system that they're delivering to their audience. Oftentimes these belief systems over time contradict and people fight. I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, I was gonna say, like, I know we're just scratching the surface, but we're already coming up on 2 hours. Is there any chance tomorrow or the next day we can do a part two? Because like I am right into this, but I don't want it to get the YouTube slowdown crap.
Oh,
Um,
sure, yeah.
are you able to do a part two like tomorrow or Sunday, or
I can
we can
definitely.
talk about it after, but
I'll tell you right now, real quick, exactly what I can do. It'll probably be Sunday, and the reason is because I got to work on my van tomorrow, and I can definitely do it Sunday. As long as I have
all right.
sunlight or no rain, I'm good. I can get all my suffering out of the way, because I got heat stroke today just doing some gardening. So I got to have a free day if I'm outside, or I'm no good for this.
No, this is all like invaluable information, and I don't want to rush through it. And that's why I want to do it. If we have to do it in 2 or 3 parts, I don't care. I want to get through all of this because I think it's important because nobody really goes in this depth. It's like, yeah, I was in my lab, and that's all you get. Well, when you
Yeah,
just kind of stumble ass backwards into this, like I did, it's like, well, what the fuck is a my lab? I don't know, right? Because I
exactly.
just found out about this stuff last year, right? And there's a lot of assumption for the pros that have been in this for years that like everybody just picks it up and knows. Like I didn't know who the fuck Corey Good was until about 6 months, well, about 3 months ago now, right? I had no idea, right? So I absolutely appreciate all of the information you can give and help me bring out on my channel and on FKN. So yeah, we'll get talking after this. I'm still kind of new at this, so it's going to cut us off, but I'm going to call you right back on either Facebook or the other social.
Okay, yeah, yeah, sounds good.
All right.
I'd be more
So
than happy to
thank
do
you,
part.
everybody, for watching. Oh, go ahead.
I said I'll be perfectly happy to do part two with you, and then that way we'll have extra time to kind of get into some other stuff. Because there's a
Oh,
lot to
absolutely.
cover. You know, I just had to get out of this. First of all, if I have to explain what's going on with this community and to make sense of it from from what I've
Yeah.
experienced, and just to protect people, because it isn't all bad, but there's a bad aspects. There's bad things. There's traps, and the way out of this,
Yeah.
man, is to get people to realize where they're at, and then we can all really come together on the same page. Because once we can get some of these deceptions out of the way that divide us, then we can really start making progress.
And where can people join your pages and groups and see your stuff too?
Okay, well, there's the Hajan Contact D channel on YouTube, the Voices of Orion. Actually, it's Voices of Orion. It's on BitChute and Rumble. I haven't done much of those channel or those particular platforms. I've got a lot of stuff going back up on YouTube that I'm behind on, so you're going to see a lot more content there. But I'm a moderator with Rob Kalil's Typical Skeptic podcast group on Telegram, so I can be found there. And I have the Planetary Consciousness Project on Telegram. I'm in and out of there, and that's a pretty good group. We need more people to post content in there. We've got about the same members, same level of members that Rob has in his group. A lot of the same people, but we need more people. So please come and join and contribute and share your knowledge, and then we can all kind of just piece it all together and make sense of it. It's my group is a free speech zone. So if you don't agree with me, that's fine. Just be respectful. And just be respectful of everybody there. I mean, we're all just trying to figure this out. There's no need to fight if we disagree, and disagreeing is a good thing because it's how you figure things out. So that's the easiest place
I
to find it right now.
I totally agree. And again, thank you, Nathan, for coming on and sharing all of your information. And yeah, we'll have you back in a couple of days because I want to keep going. So for everybody else, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time. And this will be on audio in a couple of days as well. I'm going to cut this off and then I'll call you back.
Okay, cool. Have a good one,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Take care.